Good morning, everybody. Fergus Dolan here from NALA. You're very welcome to our ESOL webinar this morning. We've got 4 ESOL webinars this week. This is the first one. So Declan Flanagan is facilitating this morning, and Declan's going to be talking about trauma-informed ESOL practices in the classroom. Declan works in Queen's University Belfast, and some of you might know him from some of our ESOL conferences over the years. He generally does a workshop or a talk each year. So over to you, Declan, and all the best.
Okay, thanks, Fergus. Hello, everyone. You're all very welcome to this morning's NALA webinar series. Again, my name is Declan Flanagan. I'm the co-chair of Nataka Island of Ireland. And I'm going to talk about my own reflections around trauma-informed ESOL provision. And so it's very much from a practitioner's perspective of what I got right and indeed what I got wrong in dealing with trauma in the classroom. So I'm just going to share my slides and we can get started. Okay, can everybody see my slides?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So let's see if I can move. Okay, one moment. I just want to come out and come back into that. Okay. 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 So, guys, my aims today are to outline what refugee trauma is and how it typically represents in learning scenarios, to outline useful trauma-informed pedagogical strategies, and to recommend further training and resources. So that'll be all provided at the end of the slide presentation, and I will email it to Fergus, and he can email it on to all everyone that has registered today. Okay, so just very quickly, Nataka basically is an organisation. It is UK based, but we do have an Island of Ireland branch, both north and south of Ireland. Basically, we want to, I suppose, work in conjunction with NALA in relation to delivering bespoke online and in-person support for ESOL tutors throughout the island of Ireland. And so we're kind of getting our name out there, raising our profile, and this is another example of how we're trying to reach further across the island of Ireland. Okay. So guys, I kind of want to really talk to you today about my own experience of dealing with trauma in the classroom. And it's my own reflections and what I did and what I should have done. And it's a learning process. But when I talk to students or indeed, teachers around trauma and trauma in the classroom, they say, I know nothing about trauma. But of course, guys, we've all kind of been through trauma ourselves in various shapes and forms. But I suppose I think when we talk about trauma in relation to our teaching, there seems to be a kind of a connotation of needing an expertise to know a lot about trauma. And that is something that's I would say is false to a certain extent. I think it's important before we start, guys, that when we're dealing with trauma, it is very complex. And after all, we are just ESOL, not just ESOL tutors. But what I'm saying is we need to be careful, and we need to be able to actually manage trauma in our classroom, but also to signpost on to direct learners who are maybe going through trauma and maybe acute or complex or chronic trauma on a daily basis, that to signpost them on to services where they can get the correct help. So it is an issue around safeguarding as well. So it's just important that before we kind of continue, I think it's important to say that we do take on a number of roles as ESOL practitioners in the classroom. But in relation to trauma, it's important that we were able to signpost our learners on to services if they require it. Okay. So guys, when we talk about trauma, I suppose people either talk about it as the big T or little t, or acute, meaning small, I suppose, a very kind of acute, where people are experiencing trauma for short periods of time. Chronic is long periods of time, and complex can be can be multifaceted. I suppose in relation to my own experience of dealing with trauma, and I've, I suppose, experienced trauma within my classroom through life transitions, vicarious trauma, complex, historical, intergenerational, collective, and acute. I think I've possibly may experienced all of those within the classroom. So I believe there's more. I'm kind of more of the understanding that there are 7 types of trauma within the classroom. Okay, guys, so I want you just to think about throughout the presentation, and maybe if you want, you could type in your questions, or you can put on your microphones after I've finished, right, and just to share your experiences of, think of instances of trauma-related situations that have risen in your classroom. What happened, if it's okay to share? How did you deal with it? Do you feel you were prepared to deal with it adequately? And in hindsight, would you have done something different? So I just want you kind of to think about it. It doesn't have to be, you know, a very kind of traumatic experience, but in relation to your daily practices, present or past. So I have worked, although I work in Queen's University and teaching, I have done a considerable amount of work working within community education within Northern Ireland. It is quite different from, I suppose, the ESOL landscape down south. In Northern Ireland, we have a very large community, voluntary, and church sector. And basically, FE, ESOL is funded predominantly through the further education colleges. And then after that, the voluntary community and the church sector, I suppose, have to look for funding elsewhere. But they're doing a lot of the heavy lifting around ESOL provision in Northern Ireland, quite simply because of the funding cuts, quite simply because of the cutbacks in education. It means that a lot of people cannot access ESOL within FE colleges. And so what we're doing, community education is providing that extra support. I have piloted a number of programs throughout Northern Ireland. And the last one I did was the 16 plus ESOL course for newcomers in Northern Ireland. And these were, well, there was a mixture, but some had come here unaccompanied. They'd made their way through Northern Ireland and had travelled across Europe, or actually Middle East, indeed Africa, and across Europe to get here. And this was the first time that I had really worked with, I would say, young learners. I'd always worked with adult learners within the community setting. And as a result, I mean, I would only meet them maybe 2 or 4 hours a week. So, you know, I always kind of got the best of them, the best, I suppose, if you like, the best side of them within my classes. And however, I was teaching this group of learners for 24 weeks for 16 hours a week. So I was getting to know these learners very, very well. And this was the first time that I had experienced trauma physically in my classroom. And I wasn't prepared at all. So it's basically, well, how did I deal with it? What did I do? What did I experience? And so this is just my reflections on what I did. So just in relation to the program that I piloted, so it was 24 weeks, it was 3 4-hour classes. For 24 weeks, there was 1 4-hour personal development session. And then we also did excursions, etc. with them. So think of it like first year secondary school. Okay. Many of these learners couldn't access formal secondary further education because of their, I suppose, their educational profile. Many hadn't attended formal education in their own country, or had only done partially, but due to war, of course, they had to leave. Or they were illiterate in their first language, or basically just a very disparate educational profile. So as a result, for a number of reasons, they couldn't access formal education. So the learners were from Syria, Iran, Somalia, Sudan, Eritrea, Afghanistan, Iraq. Some were here through the VPRS resettlement scheme. Some had been in various camps like in Jordan and Lebanon. Some were deported from Denmark. So within the classroom, there was an interesting divide between those that were settled and they were here with their families and those that came here unaccompanied. And you could really see the difference in them on a daily basis. Those that were I suppose, were in more stable family backgrounds, you could see that they were ready to learn. They were more kind of, I suppose, centered. They were more confident. They seemed happier compared to those that were interrupted or, in many cases, the unaccompanied minors. Remember, during this time, many were going through the application process to stay. So in many cases, they were coming to school each day not knowing if this was going to be their last day or if they're going to be moved to Glasgow overnight. So you can imagine that sense of fight or flight, I suppose, headspace that they were in and what they were going through. So as a teacher who had mainly taught, within the private sector, within private language schools, to teaching these learners and their educational background, it was really, really challenging. And I thought, with all my years of experience, over 20 years experience, I was out of my depth, if I'm honest. So it really was learning on the ground, learning every day, and till it came to a point where, like, okay, I've got these learners now. I now understand what I'm doing. So guys, when I started experience, I'll tell you what I experienced in my classroom, but do have a look at Alex Palanak. She has done a lot of work. So Alex is out of the University of Leicester. She has done a lot of work on ESOL provision, and she has lots of stuff on the internet, lots of stuff on YouTube. So by all means, guys, do have a look at what Alex has done. And she's done a lot of really great work. And when I started delivering this course, and when my students started expressing, I suppose, aspects of trauma in the classroom, this is where I reached for in my desperation to help me manage my classes better. So do have a look at Alex's stuff as well. So guys, when we talk about refugee trauma, we're talking about the exposure to a potentially traumatic event. I honestly don't know many of my learners' backstories, especially the unaccompanied minors, because they wouldn't tell me. But I do know that they did potentially have potentially traumatic, a PTE experience. And as a result, many did, not all, but many did have post-traumatic stress disorder. And this can have a detrimental effect on refugee language learning. So I actually, guys, the Stepping Stone program, I measured the language development and social emotional well-being at the beginning of the program and at the end of the program. And what we found was, with greater stability and social emotional well-being, this increased their language development. So there was a clear correlation between social emotional well-being and language learning. Why? Because they were, for a number of reasons, because we were meeting their needs, and when we were able to meet most of their needs, they were then able to learn. Okay, so it's meeting those basic needs that they were missing from their lives for a certain part, and so it is important. There is a lot of research out there saying that post-traumatic stress disorder has a detrimental effect on refugee language learning. So guys, this is what I experienced in my classroom. And I just want you to have a look. I'm just going to give you a minute and I'll just touch on some of them. And I want you to think about, have you experienced any of this in your classroom as well? So I'm just going to go around. I definitely I noticed or experienced all of these in my classroom, and I really had no idea only till I started looking at Alex's work did I know, okay, what are the strategies involved. So definitely, some of my students started having panic attacks or just shut down. Um, they felt unsafe. There was a lack of trust in others. There was a lot of insomnia and tiredness and absentee and lateness. So I think, guys, when we come to managing trauma informed, our classroom management needs to be much more flexible in the beginning. I think when you're dealing or teaching those unaccompanied minors in particular, I think you need to build up trust with your learners, and that takes time. But I also think there needs to be flexibility around classroom management. So, for example, poor concentration and memory, um, problems interacting with others, um, and again, extreme reactions to discussing activities. So sometimes I had two or three learners that would not want to do any activities together. So I had to teach them kind of actually as single individuals. They didn't want to discuss with anybody. They didn't want to engage with anybody else. So I had a number of learners who three didn't want to speak with anybody else, a group that were really, really social. And then there was a number who were very, very silent. So you had a lot of different aspects, a lot of different dynamics going on in the classroom, and trying to manage that is really difficult. So for me, a lot of this really resonated within my classrooms. Um, and I suppose when it comes to kind of dealing with this, you really got to think about your classroom management. However, this is not about it. I think this is really, really important coming from Kirka. These are survival mechanisms, not a lack of motivation or discipline problems. So I think it's really important that we we automatically initially I thought this is a lack of motivation, this is a lack of discipline and problems because of possibly their lack of education or their lack of familiarity with how a school works in relation to timetabling, class times, use of kind of pen and paper, etc. But it wasn't. It was basically more to do with survival mechanisms of how they were coping. So you may get all of these or some of these or maybe just one. But I definitely, in my experience, definitely experienced all of these within my classroom. And in the beginning, however, for me, how did I deal with it? Well, I suppose I kind of using this materials, but how did I know I was kind of learning was the fact that they kept coming to class every day. And all I knew is for many of them who wouldn't give me eye contact or were quiet. I think those that wouldn't give me eye contact or were quiet, they were there for like 6 weeks before they started talking. But they kept coming every day. So I knew, okay, I've got them. They're here. They keep coming. Why? Because they liked the kind of predictability of it. They knew I was going to be there every day. It was quite structured. So it gave them that routine that they were missing. Okay. So I suppose strategies. What did I use? Well, I used definitely a lot of Alex's strategies around this. So let's talk reduce daily environmental stressors, first of all. Um, so again, guys, this comes back to management style. Understand reason for lateness and absence. You've got to be kind of quite flexible and open about that, especially in the beginning. But that does need a bit of kind of compromise. For many of them, they will have doctor's appointments, or if you like, home office appointments, or because they're not sleeping at night and lateness, you've got to be flexible. I was quite stern in the beginning, but then I then realized, through reading, through researching, that I needed to kind of really to adapt and be more flexible with my classroom management. And again, in relation to that, guys, I was signposting on my student to suitable agencies in relation to trauma. And furthermore, the language was for their daily needs. So I was doing topics in the classroom. I was doing language that they needed for I suppose survival in the beginning. The language that they needed. Okay, so in relation to reducing trauma symptoms, I used a number of kind of strategies. Tread carefully. Yes. So tread carefully around likely trauma triggers. So when you're teaching, guys, you need to look at your topics. What are you teaching? What's the topic? And you become very, very aware of certain triggers like family or traveling or transport, using boats. Anything, any small thing can be a trigger for your learners. Now, it's almost impossible because you could, there were the things that I thought would trigger students didn't, but other things did. All I can say for you guys is to just be aware of topics and language and vocabulary and what you're talking about in the classroom. If that can be a triggering, I suppose would be a good thing is to check in with everyone first. Is it okay if we talk about this? But even then, guys, I've noticed that even the most random of words or the random of pictures can trigger something. So there's only so much you can do around that. But I think it's just to be aware of that. I think creating a safe space is really, really important. Allow students to opt out of certain topics if they don't want to discuss it, or indeed working with others. Some need more physical space, and they may want to discuss things in confidentiality rather than in person. And really important, don't out them to other students. And what I mean by that is if it's something particular, what you don't want is for those students to feel that the attention is on them. So that's really, really important. And never kind of focus on maybe some of the students that are dealing with trauma at the moment, have them as part of it. However, guys, you need clear ground rules and boundaries. I suppose you've got to be flexible in the beginning to a certain extent. However, you do need to have ground rules and boundaries around what people can say to each other in the classroom. Sometimes there were arguments, and sometimes there were I wouldn't say fights, but it did get slightly physical, and so we did have to have that conversation around behavior in the classroom and respect for one another in the classroom, and certain language was not allowed in the classroom as well. So those boundaries they do need to be clear. So clear rules and boundaries with some flexibility, especially in the beginning. But as I noticed, people became more familiar with the ground rules and boundaries as the course went on. I think, guys, having routine and structure is really important. I know that sounds obvious, but it's especially true for these learners who've come from having no routine and structure. They really like the fact that we started with certain activities in the morning, or, for example, we'd start with some breathing activities, which I'll come to next. But we really had that kind of routine of starting the day and ending the day, the familiarity of it. So yeah, so it's really creating that safe space. Don't force personalization. I suppose this, guys, comes back to I was very aware with some of my learners. Some were very good at sharing their experience of coming to Northern Ireland, and they were mainly from the settles that came through VPRS resettlement schemes. So they came here through those kind of schemes, which I suppose to a certain extent was less traumatic. I know 4 of my learners on the course that I delivered did not want to talk about how they got here. And so obviously you have to respect that. And but I do know that they had experienced significant trauma. My own personal feeling on this is something is that because of their lack of eye contact and the reluctance to engage for the first 6 to 8 weeks is that I think possibly they were trafficked here. But again, this type of strategies, I mean, I kind of had to develop these guys from say week 2 or 3 up until 24. So this was a learning curve for me. I don't come from a kind of a medical or kind of trauma informed background. These were skills that I had learned, I suppose, day in, day out, and from using Alex's materials. And then I developed my own as well that I thought worked for me, because every class is different. Everybody has their own story of coming to Northern Ireland or the Republic of Ireland. So it's important to kind of see them as individuals as well. And also, I feel it's important, guys, that we don't pathologize. And what I mean by that is, some of my learners who had come to Northern Ireland, they were like, I just want to get on with my life. I just want to make the most of it. I see this as a new start. So I think some of my learners were definitely better at dealing with trauma or managing it or being able to kind of, I suppose, accept what had happened to them for what it was, been able to kind of move on. So it's important that we don't group them all together as everyone is dealing with trauma. Some were and some weren't. That's not to say that they didn't find times difficult, within the class. So I think it's important that we don't pathologize all. Okay. So what a de-escalation strategy. Okay. So this is, oh, sorry. So this is kind of there was a few, especially in the early weeks of the course, I had a lot of things would escalate in relation to, there would be sometimes some teasing amongst the learners, or learners being insensitive, especially to those that didn't want to engage with others. So there was a lot of escalation that could go into shouting, roaring. Sometimes people were just to burst out crying, throw things. So I had to kind of put this into practice. So a de-escalating strategy that I used was telling the learners to take deep breaths and remain calm for both of us, to make eye contact with the students while moving slowly and giving them space, reorient them by saying their name, telling them that they're safe, remind them of the date and who you are. If required, stronger sensory stimuli, making it more louder, let them know you'll touch them on the arm. When they're back in their present moment, explain what happened, let them know they're safe, ask them if they need a timeout, offer them a drink or a sweet snack, and then ask them privately if they would like to explain to the class what happened, or indeed not. So these were, again, this is, I suppose, a learning experience for me. I'd never experienced this before in my classroom. So this was definitely, when the first time that a student had an episode in the classroom, I had no idea what to do, but to just allow them to sit down and give them space. But it did take a lot of reading and research, and reading late into the night around how do I deal with trauma in my classroom. And so I would have used this. Now, this is one de-escalating strategy. There are others, whatever works for you. A number of other guys that I started kind of, I suppose, bringing into my classes quite earlier on was relaxation and stress reduction exercises, mindful breathing exercises. Now, like, I'm not from that kind of, I wouldn't be interested in that stuff myself, like yoga or anything, but I did start using this within my own classroom, and it worked really well. especially kind of in the morning or after break when they've been outside and they're all kind of shouting in one moment, bring them back down into the classroom to settle them before learning again. I found art therapy activities, drawing and painting to express emotion and promote healing. This is where, guys, I got my 4 learners in particular who would not make eye contact with me and who would not talk for the first 6 weeks. This got them talking. And it's really therapeutic because they feel relaxed and then they're talking about the picture and who's this. And then all of a sudden they start talking about family members. And it's done because it's coming from them. So I think art therapy, that was when, okay, I think I'm building trust here. So for me, art therapy really, really worked for these, and they really enjoyed it. And more of them started to opening up. So that really worked for me. Group discussions around topics related to resilience, coping strategies, and self-care. Now, we were really lucky because we were working with a mental health charity called Extern. And one day a week, they would go down to Extern, which was kind of like a youth club, had pool tables, and it was really, really, really nice space. And Extern worked with the 16 plus around resilience and coping strategies, and building trust and confidence. So it really worked on those holistic skills, which was really, really important. So we were really, really grateful that the charity had come on board, and they really were much more experts around that. And that helped us with our teaching as well. Role-playing scenarios to practice communication and building life situations. Definitely towards the end of the course, we were able to do a lot more role-playing scenarios. People were a lot more confident, and yet the 4 students still didn't take part, but they were looking and they were watching, and that was okay. Storytelling and drama sessions can be really, really good, where students can share their narratives and similar experiences, and then collaborative works that encourage teamwork. So these have all worked to certain degrees. For me, the art therapy activities really worked well. But how did I know? Although we measured the language development at the beginning and end of the program, and social emotional well-being at the beginning and end of the program, and found both had improved. I suppose anecdotally, at the end of the course, all of them did a 5-minute presentation in English, and they were surrounded by their family, their friends. There was local councillors and politicians and academics. So a room full of people, 50 or 60 people, and all of them did a presentation about something about their home country or about themselves or what they liked. So anecdotally, do I think that they improved? Yeah, even the 4 students that didn't make eye contact with me for 5 to 6 weeks and didn't want to do any kind of group or pair work together, they all did a presentation at the end. So it showed that their confidence had really improved, and all those holistic skills that are really important for learning were there. Unfortunately, we weren't able to deliver the program due to funding because this was in community education settings. And so towards the end, what we noticed was that just as when the 4 students in particular, they started getting anxious and very nervous again. Why? Because the program was coming to an end. And because it was the summer months, we didn't know where to signpost them to for extra ESOL classes. So that became an issue that we noticed just as they were getting to a extent where they felt and trusted us and were in a stable, it then ended. So you could see they needed to know, what am I doing next? Where do I go to? And I suppose that's the problem within ESOL provision in Northern Ireland. It's still timetabled and scheduled around, I suppose, an academic year where they have 3 or 4 months off in the summer. where they can't continue with their learning. So I'm hopefully, Fergus, going to show a little video. And if not, guys, and hopefully it'll play. And if you could just put up your thumb to say that you can hear it. This is a video that we made of them. And I got permission to show this. But I'm just going to see if it works. Guys, can you all see that?
We can see the link, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Can you see the video?
Not yet, no.
Screen?
No.
Okay. Okay. No, well, not to worry. I won't share it because it's probably what I will do. I'll just come out of it. That link, if you link on that when I email you all, or Fergus emails you all
Right.
the slide, you can have a look at it. Okay. Yeah. And it just reflects the more holistic aspect of ESOL teaching, especially for those for unaccompanied. Okay. And so basically, that's my reflection, guys, of dealing with trauma informed, my experiences of dealing with those experiencing trauma in the classroom. So I'm just going to kind of open it up for any questions you have or any similar experiences that you've had around trauma in the classroom and how you dealt with it.
Thanks a million, Declan. That was great. Really, really practical. Really practical. Because there's only a small number of us, 15, I just encourage everyone to unmute and give questions for Declan, or maybe say what you did, or talk about experiences you had with students with trauma. So please do unmute and chat.
Anybody, you can write in the chat function or
have any of you been teaching or taught ESOL students where you felt perhaps some of the students had experienced trauma?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, Dervla.
Hi. Well, just this week, I work with a volunteer organization, and we do our best in terms of the teaching, but it's really a lot of it is to provide a space that people feel comfortable and their language skills improve. As you were saying, they get better when they get confidence and they're not, so we've seen improvements, over the time, but officially we're not as such teachers. But anyway, but this week actually in particular, I did meet with somebody separately outside the class, and to be honest, I knew immediately that this person was extremely stressed, and some of the indicators you were saying about not making the eye contact and all that thing, and the person looked physically unwell as well. And so I just knew that they wanted to meet me for a different reason. But like that, you said, you have to make them feel safe, use their name, reassure them they have friends, that we're their friends, and that this is a place that they can rely on. And I suppose it was just the reason I'm kind of going on a bit is because we're all volunteers. We have noticed that last year we didn't want to stop at the academic year end because we felt they needed us, and also the place where we're helping, it's we don't really have any official status in there. We've a room within a reception center, and we don't want to lose that foothold either. So I think really what we're going to do is we are going to continue because I think they need it.
Yeah, but thank you for that. I agree with you. I kind of feel that is, and that's when some of my students got really nervous because they're like, what happens now? Where's the provision coming from? I need that routine. I need that familiarity. So I think if you can kind of keep going over the summer, because the summer, remember, like, guys, back in the day when we were all kind of kids, I mean, they were long, the days are long, really, really long. And when you've got nothing to do, as in the case of many of these, now I know in Northern Ireland, they've got access to gyms and stuff like that. But still, for these young learners, it's long days of boredom and really, being with their own thoughts and in their own head too often as well. So having that place, especially throughout the summer months, Dermot, if you can, it'd be a great benefit to them because there is that sense of routine and continuity, which is definitely what they need.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'd be definitely advocating within the group that even if we do a reduced timetable, if people are not available to volunteer, we at the moment we do 3 evenings a week, but I just think it's important to keep the consistency there,
Or even if they can, if there's somehow they can connect with their wider community, is there something else they could get engaged with or to be part of? You know what I mean? So are there any other community activities that they could be engaged with? Possibly have a look around so that it's they're continuing to be engaged and not to kind of come in on themselves again because they've taken that while to come out of themselves to trust. And the summer months, it is, I always find it's like starting over again. You're kind of having to do what you did where you were at the end of the year. You're almost kind of back to square one in the first couple of weeks of a new academic year. So yeah.
Okay,
absolutely.
thank you. Thanks.
No problem.
Any other questions or points there for Declan? Declan, just before we started, you were chatting to Derv and I about tutor boundaries. Is there anything you or anyone else listening wanted to add or talk about that?
I think that's a really, Fergus, if I may, I just think I do a lot of work in Northern Ireland. There's a very large voluntary church sector that are delivering a lot of ESOL, and it's great because they're doing a lot of the heavy lifting. It's a place where they can go, and the churches. There's a variety of churches up in Northern Ireland, and some are very religious and kind of evangelical, and then others are a kind of more there's a broad spectrum, but they're all well-meaning, and that's great, and I kind of welcome it all. But there was certain times when I did think red flag. I think you need to know your boundaries in relation to how much you can do. Remember, you're just a teacher there in a voluntary or maybe community or an ETB stance. Or what you need to do is be careful of when to know your boundaries around how much help you can give. I always say kind of signpost on, where possible. And can always kind of meet obviously within the school or the community centre, etc. But I did hear of kind of scenarios of tutors or volunteers bringing their students back to have something to eat, and then there was a dependency there that grew, and it just became very, very messy. But also the fact of like when I've asked what's your safeguarding protocol, they didn't have any, and I'm like, guys, you've got to get your protocols in order. It's all about just protecting everybody, and even though they're adults, they're still vulnerable adults to a certain extent. So it's just important that, especially those working within the voluntary sector, that and community sector, that you have to have boundaries. I think that's just really important, just to protect everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same in the adult literacy world. Any of you who before or at the moment are literacy tutors, either one-to-one or group, there are boundaries which you need just to be careful about, but giving phone numbers or having students in your own home, as Declan said, which might be ill-advised,
Yeah, phone numbers is another thing. It's kind of like, I just keep. I think that's just not. I would I'd be kind of against that. Make it up. There are other services out there to kind of signpost on, but say that you're here every week. So that's how you kind of, I suppose, kind of get around that. I'll kind of give you my number. And yeah, it's fraught with possible kind of situations, and you just got to be wary of that. Yeah.
Like the citizens information down south and other
That's it.
organizations which can help with individual needs that ESOL students may have, because often you might not be have the professional qualifications to
Yeah,
cope and advise. Yeah, or you may have, maybe you do, but so it's just to be something to be aware of. In the adult literacy world, we used to do a lot more training on defining and looking at tutor boundaries, and we just haven't done as much in the
yeah.
Go on,
If
Declan,
I
sorry.
make it, you know, I was just was saying, you know, and I knew I met one of my learners, I think 8 months after the course finished, and between that time, like he'd been sectioned. You know, he was kind of under the Mental Health Act. He was brought in
No.
to a secure unit. And so I met him out in a park and we kind of discussed, you know, and he was doing much better, doing well. And you kind of want, you feel like you want to do more. And, but you've got to have those boundaries in place, you know. And I knew kind of after the course finished, I just knew that this young guy is going to find it really difficult. So I think that comes back to, I think, Dervla, what you talked about, you know, if you can keep those kind of classes going, it's just really important for a routine. It's really important to have a kind of a place to go. Yeah, so it's a tough one because you do get attached to people, you know, because you want to help, but I think the boundaries are there to protect everybody. I think that's what I'll say. Yeah.
Excuse me. Can you recommend either yourself, Declan, or Fergus, any good agencies for us to refer people to that would deal with trauma or something like that? Just because you don't want to just kind of go, okay, I'll help you, but not really know where to send them to.
Yeah. Fergus from down south.
Well, I off the top of my head, I can't think of anywhere, Kate. Derv or anyone else? Can anyone else come in there with Derv's question? Or with Kate's question, sorry.
There is, I mean, one that just strikes me again, it's not something I've recently had contact with, but Sparazzi would be a big organization and they are based in Dublin, so I don't know what their reach is in terms of phone contacts and things, but they work with people specifically people who've experienced torture. So it's kind of a bit specific. I'm not sure how they manage that, but they would have a lot of psychosocial supports and ESOL resources as well. We'd know a couple of their staff over the years. So it probably depends on the area as well, you know, because that's one point, and I'm not sure what it's like now, but there was some therapy organizations were providing free counseling to people from Ukraine. It was a HSC project to provide therapy support. So maybe I'll have a think about that, Kate, and see if I can think, but it might be people here who'd have much more experience on the call.
Kate, possibly the refugee organizations, they will have signposting. So I would contact the main kind of refugee migrant centers, and they'll definitely have kind of signposting for those, you know, specific refugee council. Irish Refugee Council. Yeah.
The legal aid board, as soon as somebody's assigned a solicitor, they're given a fact sheet and it has a list of loads and loads of organizations, and there's definitely health organizations within that. So there's websites, there's, you know, so as soon as a person is assigned now, but you see, when they're assigned the solicitor, they may have other things on their mind then. So I suppose it's, you know, and they may have lost that piece of paper. Who knows, you know? So, but there's definitely a lot of organizations in Dublin for sure.
A lot of the local development companies would offer services like that as well. I know in Clare, like the Clare Local Development Company or Clare Care would work a lot. I presume it would be similar in other counties.
So thanks for that. Dervla, did you mean FLAC, the free legal aid, FLAC? Is that who you meant, or someone else?
No, when the person comes into Ireland and they're looking to apply for refugee status, they are entitled to legal aid. So it's the legal aid board.
Oh, legal aid board, okay.
Yeah, so they'll be advising them on their application in terms of their application for refugee status or for subsidiary protection or whatever it is. But as part of the initial package that they get, there is a really long list
Right.
of places that people can contact. I was kind of surprised myself. There was so much on it. But anyway.
Thanks a million. Yeah, so each person gets assigned a solicitor to work with them, or is that it?
Yeah. Now the working with them is, you know, it's not that proactive. They get, you know, some contact, you know, after they've had their interview. Really is what happens. They are in once they get their interview date, I think is the first contact. And that's probably when they get this about the list. But you see, as everybody knows, there's a massive waiting period now, even for these so-called express cases. But there's nothing express about them, you know. They're waiting for ages still. And, you know, funnily enough, that makes them really anxious as well. And even when they've got work and everything, you know, I suppose initially I didn't really understand that, because I was thinking, well, look, you know, if you've got somewhere to stay, you've got money, you're kind of integrating, and really, in some ways, the longer they're integrating, the better, because they're establishing connections and they're forming relationships, which make them more valuable to Irish society when they that they can demonstrate during their interview. But that, look, I'm not in their situation, and I definitely know that they get anxious when they don't have their interview, even though the interview might mean they're going to be deported quicker, but they don't see it that way.
Okay, thanks, Dervla. Any other questions or points or advice there for the rest of the group or for Declan?
I just put there's lots of links and resources at the end of the slide as well, Fergal, that people can look through and see what works for them. Great. I would say, with dealing with trauma, it's trial and error. You'll find things that work for you would work for your learners. So don't be afraid to say, "Oh, I didn't do the best you can." This is not, it's no right or wrong. It's just about you're dealing with very kind of complex needs that you're not qualified to deal with. So don't be kind of, if things don't work out, do the best you can in that moment, because it's very unpredictable.
Good point. And maybe if we follow up with Dervla McGurr's advice on the legal aid board, if you got a list of the organizations, you might see an organization or two there that can help someone who's experiencing trauma. As Derv Ryan said, there is Sperassi in Dublin. They're on the North Circular Road. I put the link up, SPIRASI. I think it's SPIRASI, Sperassi. And they definitely, as Derv said, help people who've experienced torture or trauma. So I like Derv, I'm not sure if they're around the country. I don't think they are, but people maybe could visit them, or if you're in the Dublin area, they're on the North Circular Road up near Handel's Corner is where they were based. I think they moved around a little bit, but they're Dublin based. So yeah, but the list from the Legal Aid Board might give a lot of contact, and the Citizens Information Board too might be of help. Yeah,
it's just, sorry to interrupt again, but the Legal Aid Board list does give other counties, like they'll give Clare, the services in Clare, in Cork, and you know, so it's not just Dublin based. So that's the good thing about it. I thought it was countrywide. Great. So the Legal Aid Board, that could be invaluable for people. So if we've no further questions or points for Declan, it just leaves it to me to say thanks again, Declan, for a really very practical and experience-based presentation, so to give people plenty of guidelines. And yeah, so thanks so much, Declan. It was really informative.
Thank you, guys. And thank you, and thanks for having me, and thanks for coming online, everyone. I hope you got something from it. I'll email Fergus the the slides and he'll send them out to
I'll
everybody.
send them around. And if any of you are interested in finding out more about Natekla, you can email me and I'll forward on to Declan.
Yeah.
He's with the Island of Ireland branch of Natekla. So if you'd like to be a member, please let us know.
Or reach out around other aspects of ESOL, around training or support, etc. Yeah. Thanks, Fergus.
Okay, thanks, Declan, and thanks everyone for
Bye,
tuning
guys. Bye,
in. I hope there's Natekla stuff come up now, the branch network. Thanks. So yeah, thanks very much, everyone, and I hope the sun gets stronger as the day goes on. You have a good day. Okay. All the best. By the way,
Thanks, guys.
last thing, just on the webinars this week, I just got information during the webinar here that tomorrow's webinar was due from 1 to 2. It's working with ESOL students with broken or no education prior to accessing education in Ireland. So Damien Rocks and Sarah Golding were due to facilitate that. They can't do it tomorrow. So we're looking at, if any of you are booked in, we're looking at putting on a week later on Tuesday at lunchtime again. So tomorrow's webinar, ESOL webinar, is postponed. And anyone who's registered, I will email them today on the new date and time. But it looks like Tuesday week at 1 to 2. So thanks for that. Thanks, Declan. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Bye-bye.